Welcome, everyone, to the Spiritual Forum. So glad you're here. I'm real excited about my guest today, and I'll let you know why in a minute. But before we get into that, I would love for you to contact me. If you have a really interesting story, an interesting experience of the divine, an interesting transformation in your life, I'm also looking for people who are living as love in action. I'm really interested in talking to people who are out there actually living as love. And I'd love to talk to you if you're one of those people, or if you know somebody. Last call out for my retreat, which is in less than 2 weeks. And you can find out more about that. It's called The Road to Eden, and that's on the spiritualforum.org/retreat. And please give a shout out to this podcast if you really get something out of it. I would really appreciate if you could leave a positive rating and review, because all that stuff matters in the material world. Doesn't matter so much to me personally, but it does matter in the material world. And I'd like to get this message of hope and love and transformation and awakening out in the world. Okay, so that's my run up. Let me tell you about Alan Abrams. First, did I pronounce your name right?
Yes, yes,
I should
that's
have
good.
asked you that beforehand. Yeah. Okay, let me tell you about Alan. Alan was an ultra Orthodox Jew living in London. For many years, he taught Jewish philosophy and spent most of his spare time studying Jewish literature. In his early 30s, together with his wife and children, he made the tough decision to leave his job and religion. That was the beginning of a journey that challenged him beyond anything he could ever have imagined. His entire world was turned upside down. It was only a few years ago that he realized that a spiritual revelation he had in his early 20s held the answers to all of life's problems. Now, Alan is living in a small coastal town in Wales with his family, and he wants to help others find the answers they are looking for. I'm excited to have Alan on with me today because I just love talking to people about their stories, and something as transformational as leaving your religion, it's huge. And I just know that there was some really interesting wisdom in this. So welcome, Alan.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, I'm so glad to talk to you across the waters in Wales, and really interested in hearing your story. So why don't I just open by asking you to tell me what you want to tell us about your story and your experience in your 20s, and how you got to where you are now.
So, so I guess I'll start when I was 18, and then maybe we can just kind of work our way around because there's kind of relevant stuff probably when I'm 10 and 14 and
Of
things.
course.
But so when I was 18, I was working in London, and I was kind of enticed to go on a trip with the Jewish outreach organization, and they took us to New York, and they started talking about Judaism and Jewish philosophy, and they started proving, like giving all these proofs about how the Jewish religion is true and it's an absolute kind of reality and a fact. And I was young. I had questions. My life wasn't quite going as planned, and I was intrigued, and I was kind of getting drawn in, and I was listening to what they had to say, and I felt like this was the answer to all my problems. That's what I felt like at the time. I felt like this was going to take me to a beautiful place, and so I became engrossed, and I was going to lectures, and then after maybe a few months, I made the decision to leave my job and actually go to America and to study full time. So it was a big decision at the time, and I went. Well, my intention was to stay a year, and I ended up staying 4.5 years in full time study. And it was very, very intense. Like a lot of people there were kind of casual about their studies, but I was, there was a drive. I can't explain exactly where it came from, but I had a drive. And I remember I walked into the study hall on the first day, and I looked around, and there was just a sea of books, huge kind of books everywhere, all in a different language, either Hebrew or Aramaic. And I clearly remember saying to myself, I'm not leaving until I can understand all these books. And from then on, every day I was studying from probably 6 in the morning till 12 at night with hardly any breaks in between. So very, very intense. And I was just soaking everything up. And at the time, I just really believed this was true. This was the truth. This is my new life. This is everything. I just studied and studied and studied. And that went on for 4.5 years, basically, that intense studying, really. And some beautiful things happened during that time. Some very spiritual things happened. I got very lost in prayer. Prayer became like a meditation for me. But then the studying also became a meditation, because after about 10:30 at night, virtually everyone had left. And there was me kind of until normally just after midnight, because the lights went off at midnight, and then there was something special about being in there all alone, kind of for the last maybe 15 minutes. Probably was an ego thing, you know, like there's just something. There was something nice about it. So that went on for about 4.5 years. I want to tell you a story that happened, though, because it was a fascinating story at the time. I think it was about 3 years in, and then financially it was becoming a little bit tricky for me to stay. And I was in real turmoil. I remember I just couldn't make the decision. I wanted to stay, but it didn't really make sense. All my friends were working, all my old friends were working. It wasn't really adding up anymore, but I didn't know what to do. And I was in the study hall, and it was after midnight, and the lights had gone off. And I just remember bursting out into tears, because I was just confused, you know. And then at the time I prayed to God. I don't remember exactly what I said, but the rough theme of it was, I have no idea what to do. Just give me a sign, anything, you know, anything to help, you know. And then I went to bed, and I woke up the next day, and it was, you know, a normal day. And then we got to lunchtime, and I walked into lunch hall, and it was really odd. There was a guy there who had never been there before, but I knew him. I'd met him once when I went for a meal at one of the families that used to invite us in. So I recognized him. I got my lunch and I sat down. And then he got lunch and he came and sat down. Now, the whole thing was really weird, because people didn't come for lunch. You know, it was only students, really, or maybe the rabbis, or, you know, the people teaching. But anyway, he sat down. We're just kind of chatting about different things. And then he turns to me and he said, I want to support you in your learning. He's like, I'm going to financially support you. He said, I'm going to pay all your seminary fees, and then I'm going to give you some pocket money. And I just remember, you know, when like it's like a burst of emotions. It was like, I prayed to God last night, and here it is. Like that doesn't happen. Like, it's meant to be like mysterious, and it's meant to be like a little, you know, it's just not meant to happen like that, you know. And I remember I just had this conversation. He just like left. It wasn't like a big deal for him. I don't know what was going on in his mind, or why he turned up. Something, it must be something to do with the conversation I had with him when I met him at that lunch, but I have no idea. And I remember I went into the study hall, because I used to learn through lunch. And I remember I just laughed, and then I cried, and I laughed, and I cried, and I think I was more confused now than I was before. You know, it's just really weird. But that was probably my first time I kind of had a deeply spiritual experience. It was really like real. It was really real, as if like, you know, I'm not alone, you know, in the universe. And he did. He sponsored me for the rest of my time studying, and the money just came in every month. So that's a little aside, but it was just kind of a fascinating experience I had, you know, when I was there.
It's so interesting.
And then I left, and I ended up working for a Jewish organization. And I was quite young. I was in my early 20s, but I was kind of thrown into this environment where I was teaching like a whole array of different people. I mean, everyone was Jewish, but there were people double my age. You know, it was kind of really an interesting dynamic. But I was teaching people Jewish philosophy 101. I was doing small classes. I was just kind of finding my feet. And then this Jewish organization, and I don't know how they came to know about it, but they came to find out about a man called Sid Banks. And Sid Banks lived in America. Actually, I think it was Canada. And he'd had this... he was enlightened. He had a very deep spiritual experience. Just a man from Scotland who he was a welder, I think, by trade. And he just had this really deep experience, and he was teaching, what he learned. And the organization I worked for getting quite involved, and people flying out to see him speak and to see some of his students speak. And I was listening to some tapes and CDs and things at the time when they had tapes and CDs. I feel so old. I'm really not very old. And then eventually I had my turn. They offered me basically to go to Seattle to meet one of his students and to spend a weekend out there in Seattle. So I went out there with an open mind. I was intrigued by the whole thing. And I'm pretty sure it was on the second day. So I was just in a house. It was by the lake. It was a beautiful place. And the guy there, his name was Chaim, a student of kind of Sid Banks. And he started talking about the true nature of thought. And I don't remember exactly the content. And he had a flip chart, and he was kind of explaining about reality and how our thinking plays a part in reality. And I don't know exactly what he said, but I just burst out into uncontrollable laughter. And Chaim, the trainer there, I just remember he kept saying, like, why are you laughing? Like, he was kind of like, it's a confusing moment. And I couldn't stop laughing. I was so free and so light, and I didn't know why, but I just, for the first time in my life, I felt so good for no reason at all. And I just couldn't stop laughing. And I had no idea how long that went on for. And I was in just such a beautiful place. And I stayed there, I think it was another couple of days. And he kept trying to have these conversations with me about, when this kind of passes and you're not feeling so good, or you get a bit depressed, let's talk about how you're going to deal with that. And I just thought he was crazy. Like, I couldn't imagine ever going back into my personal mind. And maybe I can explain that a little bit later, but I was out of all my thinking. I was out of that chatter mind, and I was just calm and had this beautiful feeling, just beautiful every time I woke up, and virtually all day, like deep within my stomach and a little bit and throughout the body, just a deep, deep sense of calm and just happy, just for no reason at all.
Wow.
And he, and it was odd the next 2 days, because we kind of didn't really know what to talk about, because I was just okay. Like I had nothing left to ask, and I didn't need to be told anything else. I was just kind of okay for the first time. And I got home, and that was just bizarre, because my parents had no idea. I had all this energy, and I was calm, and I was happy, and I didn't know why I was happy particularly. And my mum kept saying, "Oh, this can't last. This is weird," and no one really understood around me, and then I was a little bit confused as well. And to cut a long story short, after a few weeks, I started getting pulled back into my personal mind, and it felt very uncomfortable. I was different from everyone else, and it was all rather confusing, and that was kind of that. And I got lost, I guess, back into this physical reality and back into my personal mind. And then if we fast forward, I guess a few years, so I got married and I had kids and everything, and I was still studying and teaching and all that was going on, and I was reading and you get to the end of the book, and then they give you a list of all the books that have been quoted, within the book, so then I'd buy all those books as well. I was just like, I was like a real bookworm. I just read all those books and then all those books, and I was just reading and in my head, but my reading was starting to lead me to a place I didn't expect, and I guess this was quite academic, but I was coming to a realization where I didn't believe that Judaism was actually true. And that was a big problem for me. So there were some Jews I knew who also didn't believe it was true, but they were quite comfortable with the culture, and just kind of living within the community. But for me, it was a big deal, because I entered, kind of the religious life because I really genuinely believed it was true. And my reading and understanding was taking me to a place where I no longer believed that. And it got to a point where I was 100% convinced it wasn't true. And now what do I do? Because I'm right in the heart of the Jewish community, to the point where I'm opposite the synagogue, I go to. I'm like right there. My job is all about teaching Jewish philosophy. And my wife is ultra-Orthodox like me. My kids are in like an ultra-Orthodox school. It's like, whoa, this is like, what do I do? Where do I go? Like, so eventually, I plucked up the courage to start talking to my wife, and interestingly, she was pretty more open than I realized, and had a lot of questions herself. And we kind of came to realization eventually, like I said, to cut a long story short, but we came to the realization we wanted to leave our religion.
Can we pause for just a second? I just have a question. I've got a few questions for you, but when you say that you came to realize that Judaism wasn't true, what does that mean?
It was,
I mean, is it like all of the teachings, the writings, like there's no value in it, or there's value, but it's different than what you thought? Or what does it really mean to you that it wasn't true?
it's a good question. I know I saw the value. I saw the value in some of the teachings,
Yeah,
the stories, like in the Bible,
like a literal,
or the Torah. Yeah. So I believe that was all true,
that they literally actually happen exactly as it was written.
yeah,
Okay.
Moses did receive, the Ten
Ten
Commandments,
Commandments.
and this was all absolute, and these were laws, given by God for us that we had to follow. And I came to realization, my own realization, not to convince anyone else, but that this just wasn't true. And that was an issue, for me. Like I said, it's
Yeah,
not
yeah.
necessarily an issue for everyone, because like you said, there is value to all religion, but for me, it was a big issue.
Yeah, and there can be value in the stories without the stories being true.
Exactly.
And some people throw the whole thing out. And I have no judgment on any of it, but I was just kind of curious if it was like I'm throwing the whole thing out, the whole book, or if it's like I just see that this isn't literal truth. Like it's not. Maybe it's historical from a metaphorical standpoint or something like that, but not completely, true as you had thought. So it sounds like that's kind of where you landed. Like there's still value, but it's not true for you.
Yeah, and yeah, I think that's correct. But
Yeah.
also, like, Judaism is quite intense, in terms of like, so, like on the Sabbath, you can't use electricity, and
Right, right.
so it's like, if it started to become like, well, if I don't believe it's true, it started to feel quite restrictive, and then it also started to feel quite restrictive for my wife, so I think that's where the conflict started to come into play.
Yeah,
It
and I
was
can
fine when we
appreciate.
believed it was true, but now it's kind of like, now it's very restrictive,
Right, right. And I can see that your life was so entwined in that world. So how do you extricate yourself, or how do you stay in it but not but feeling so completely different?
Yeah. So this was probably the hardest point in my entire life. Is it was the scariest thing, because the outside world was unknown. There was no guarantee this was going to work out, and we didn't actually know how to do it either. Like, how do I get a new job and I don't have any skills? And
Yeah.
there was it was just like, well, we didn't really know how we're going to do it. But the tricky thing about this stage of my life is, because I started questioning religion, I started questioning everything. So it was now I was questioning God and spirituality, and now I was grappling with atheism. And I mean, there was like, then our whole marriage fell apart, because we started questioning our marriage. Like, why are we together? Like, what is marriage? Like,
No, I get it. Yeah. I mean,
I
the
like open
awakening
a can of
process is
worms.
rough like that. You start questioning, I think this is why a lot of people don't even go up to the edge of awakening, because it is scary. Because once you awaken to something, then you start questioning a lot. And then some of these fundamental roots that you have in life get uprooted. And then now where do I go, and who am I? And it can be very lonely, but kudos to you for staying on this journey. So keep going.
So yeah, so it was really tough. We're questioning. I can't even think of there wasn't anything we weren't questioning. I mean,
Right.
everything. But our marriage was a big one. Our marriage was literally falling apart, and we made the decision to try and find a therapist or a coach or someone. And we found these, I think they call themselves relationship coaches. So husband and wife, and we really wanted like a couple. We just felt kind of that's a nice dynamic where both sides of relate to both of us. So we went to a house and we basically started therapy, and it just everything was shocking, just for example, like marriage, we were taught in kind of Jewish faith that marriage is about becoming one, and our first session, I don't know how it came up, at the first session, these coaches say to us, it's not about being one, it's like you're meant to be like individuals, and and then as individuals, kind of choose to come together. And it was just like oh god, like another thing, like we don't know anything now. It's like, oh, it's just like it just got worse. So they, just like everything we believed was just just being broken down, and and it was just, and then commitment, commitment for us was like a religious thing, and now it's like, I don't know, like, is commitment a thing? Like, does it matter? Are relationships important? Just everything. I mean,
yeah.
So we went to them for a little bit, and I mean, it was really interesting. We went to different therapists, and a lot of stuff started coming up, and my wife and I went to really dark places. It was really getting kind of overwhelming, and same time we were navigating how to kind of leave the community, and there were some funny times as well, like, because we lived opposite the synagogue, so but we didn't want to be restricted anymore. We weren't keeping anything at home, and I was kind of starting not to go to synagogue as much, but not really telling my parents what was going on. And it was, and I remember we wanted to go out on a Saturday, and Saturday morning is synagogue, service, and it was like, as we drive out, we're gonna meet like everyone, like, you're keeping the Sabbath. So I just remember, like, my wife would put like big like black sunglasses on and kind of like shoot down in her chair, in the passenger seat, and then she'll be like, just get out of here quick. And there were some kind of funny moments, where we just trying to sneak around, trying to kind of figure it all out. And yeah, so we're grappling with that. And then the other issue was, our children have Hebrew names, and we're like, well, if we send them to a non-Jewish school, it's not really fair that they're going to have these kind of biblical, kind of Hebrew, very Jewish names. I mean, we just weren't sure. We want, it was a big thing for our kid. We realized it's kind of major for our kids, like our decisions are now having an impact.
Right.
We're kind of shattering our kids, security and safety and comfort zone. And so my daughter was able to shorten her name, but there was a really interesting thing that happened to my son, because my son, even if you shortened his name, it was still very biblical. It was still very Hebrew. Like, there wasn't a lot we could do. And my wife was quite clever, and she would just kind of hint to him that, might be nice to explore different names, or I can't remember how she did it, but she was just like putting hints, but we didn't want it to sound weird or like overwhelming. But our kids were very aware. We were very open about kind of the journey we were on, and we had family kind of chats and discussions, and we were very open. And then my son, it was so random. He wakes up one morning and he's like, I had a dream, I know what my name is, and that's it. And then from then on, that was his English name, and that was it. And it was never spoken about again. And what the dream was, I don't know. But he knew, like, had a dream, this is my name, and that was it. And that's, and that. But imagine having to go and tell your parents that your kids now have new names.
That's huge.
And you need to call them those. And I was talking to a therapist about the time, and he was kind of helping me through. He was I think a psychotherapist, I can't remember now. And and I got their names changed legally. I did all the paperwork, and then I had to go and speak to my parents and discuss that with them. And that's not anything that anyone wants to go through in life.
Yeah.
And we did it, and I felt good that I was brave, and I explained what was going on in our life, and I explained we're making changes. And my parents kind of sat and listened and asked some awkward questions, but we kind of got through it. And it was all very awkward for a while. So we just kind of, they didn't want to lose their relationship with us, but at the same time, it was all really difficult. My brother-in-law's a rabbi as well, so there's a lot of dynamics there. My
Right.
wife's father's a rabbi, and there's just kind of a lot going on. So we're kind of navigating all that with our relationship, and eventually we found a little school in Wales, and we thought that'd be great for our kids. That's how we end up in Wales. So then we're able to move away from the Jewish community, and kind of try and start like a new life where we're not constantly, well, we don't feel like we're running away, but we feel like we're just living, our new life.
Now, did you have any, so you left Judaism. Did you leave God?
I did for a while, and I got into really, really dark places. I mean, I was suicidal at one point, not seriously, like I didn't actually plan like a suicide, but I was having a lot of suicidal thoughts. I started thinking, I think it'll be easier just to go,
Yeah, and I think, I don't know where you are now, but I think a lot of people who question religion and question life and question who am I and what it's all about, and if they question God and they pull away from God, it can get very dark there. And a lot will go through an atheist, there is no God, and then ultimately come back. Did you ultimately come back in a different way?
I think in a very different way.
Yeah.
And that started happening in Wales, where that original revelation, or whatever it was that happened in Seattle, when I just kind of burst out laughing, that started coming back to me. And then I started listening to Sid Banks again, because there was some kind of videos online, and just trying to remind myself. And those beautiful feelings started to come back. But I was starting to understand it a bit better this time, because I can't explain why, but the place I was in now, I was kind of understanding what that was. And I don't know if I actually understand what it is, but it's like when you get outside of your head, I guess this is what I want to share with people, and it's really hard to share, but I thought, let's try.
Sure, let's try.
Is, the mind's going chatter, 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 kind of all day long. And if your mind just goes quiet just for a minute, or this is how I experience it, and the mind goes quiet just for a second, I get this really strong feeling. And for me, that's the divine, and that's the soul, or the universe, or, I know there's so many names.
There's
and in a way, to me, it doesn't really matter what the name is. But for me, it's so strong and just pure love. And to me, it's just got to be spiritual. It's everything that spirituality could be. And when I get out of my head, I get these beautiful sensations. And in that moment, it's like, everything's okay. And it doesn't matter if I've got a lot of money, if I've got no money, if I've got a nice house, not a nice house. It's like nothing could give me more than this experience. And to me, that's just pure spirituality. And to me, that's also well-being, because I work in a college and stuff now. I hear a lot about well-being, and then, they'll talk about, go for a walk, have an early night, all these types. It's very much about doing things to try and feel better. And for me, my experience taught me do less. Like when you stop, well-being and spirituality to me are like the one and the same. It's like, it's pure health. And I feel like in the society and the surroundings I live in, everyone's looking for well-being out there, and they're all kind of searching. It's a big topic now, which is great. And, and they're kind of on the journey to find it. But they're looking out there, and well-being doesn't actually exist in my mind. It just doesn't exist in the physical world. And it is when everything stops, you're there, and I deeply believe that we are spiritual, like we are spirituality, it's our essence. So it's actually when we stop, we find ourselves, we're here and everything's okay.
There's nothing to seek.
There's nothing to seek. And when you seek, it's just you're back in the mind. I mean, that's how I experience it. As soon as you start seeking truth, or or trying to figure something out, then it's kind of you're back in the personal mind, and then before you know it, you're lost. I feel like one it's like, so once you activate the personal mind, it's like, oh, yippee, I'm back on again. And then it's like, it's all nice. And then suddenly you're like, oh, no, it's not nice anymore. It's if like once you activate it, it just goes anywhere. It's like, it's just kind of a mess. And then, and one of the things I guess I realized was how to get to that place more often. And for me, is listening. I just started realizing when I listen to people, I realized I never used to listen to people. I used to, it's hard to explain, but I would be thinking while I was listening, like maybe thinking what I was going to say, or judging them, or just, it's strange, but it's like I wasn't listening, with a quiet, open mind. And then it became like a bit of a practice, like I was really enjoy just listening to people until they stopped speaking, rather than, I used to be very prone to interrupting kind of halfway through, or, towards the end, to kind of like jump in. And I just would listen, and then when I would listen, that beautiful feeling would come. It's like I was as if like, because you can't think and listen at the same time. Or that's how I experience it. So when I was totally listening, then I'd go into my true self, into my nature, back into spirituality. And then I would just listen as well. Like I mean, I still do. I love it, but just when it's quiet, I just listen. And listening is so interesting because it's not quiet as if I would have thought quiet is. I can kind of hear, but I can't explain. I don't know what I hear, or what you hear when your mind goes quiet. Sometimes it feels like, is it energy? But it's kind of just interesting. I mean, obviously sometimes you hear nature or birds and it's beautiful, and sometimes it's just very quiet, but there's something to the quiet, and it's kind of a magical thing. But for me, it is, spirituality is about this feeling, it's really, so there are many techniques out there, and I think they're all valid. And I think must be a multitude of paths, to help individuals go inside. And there's so many different ways of doing it. But I think, and I don't know what your perspective and your listeners' perspective are, but I think ultimately everything's pointing to the same place. Like ultimately, it's all a inner experience. It is somehow, I think that what I experience this absolute kind of love and joy, and this kind of inner experience. I feel like as if like all the spiritual teachers are just pointing there, coming from all different angles, but all like kind of ultimately trying to have the same experience.
Yeah, and the world is so loud and so alluring, and everything is like, it's like we've been placed in this place where the answer is within. Like you say, it's like it's here, it's right here. We can go anywhere, and it's right here. It's never going to elude us. But there's all this calling of all the chatter out there, and also the judgment of our mind that pulls us away from that. And I think it's just kind of, maybe, I don't know, maybe it's just a test for us to keep coming back to ourselves. I'm very intrigued by this practice of listening. So, like, this is like a spiritual practice for you.
Yeah, but it is, I don't set a time to do it. I
You
really
just do
enjoy
it.
it. And it's a challenge. Like, is sometimes, my chatter mind is, all the thoughts are coming, and it's like, oh, someone's speaking. So I can listen. And it's like, and then when I start listening, I get a nice feeling. So the more I do it, the less enticed I am by my thoughts, and the more, because I know it's so enjoyable when I listen, but even at work, it's sometimes when I'm working, it's listening, like to the keyboard, to little notifications. It's nothing
It's bringing you
amazing.
to the present. It's like whatever is happening is keeping you in the present, I think. And I think this is so interesting, Alan. I'm so glad you're talking about this, because we learn a lot about, or we hear a lot about, meditation and observing your thoughts, or, there's all these practices, but listening, I mean, as I started to say, listening's so easy. I don't know that it's easy because most of us don't do it, but it's there for us all the time, you know. So the idea that I don't need to create a special space, I don't need to have an altar. I mean, it's all great if I do, or have a certain time of day that I come apart, or I have go through class. I mean, the opportunity to listen is all the time.
Yeah, and even like at work, like some of my, one of my team will come in, for a chat about something, and for me, it's quite an exciting opportunity to, to see if I can listen to them all the way until they stop speaking, and when I do, I feel like it's like you're out your head, and like you said, you're here. I guess that's what people call the now. You're in the now, and it's beautiful. And another thing, just talking about the now, is I used to think when I would hear people talk about getting in the now, like Eckhart Tolle is, very
Right.
famous for that. And Sid Banks, who I learned from, was big into that. But I used to think at times, like, why would I want to be in the now? Like the now is horrible. When times
Just
are
get out
tough,
of here.
you like question it. Like maybe nice for you, but I don't want to be in the now. Like I want to be everywhere but the now. But I started to realize the now is not hearing your problems. The now is kind of a spiritual place.
Yeah.
Is when you're outside your head and it's quiet, and you just it's that feeling. I just feel like it always comes back as that feeling, and when you're outside your head, it's the whole world looks different. What you perceived as a problem, just the problem kind of disappears, but also certain things become more enhanced. So you'll see a flower, or just sitting in your office and there'll be a picture, or just like white walls. My office has a lot of white. It's like the whiteness is more white. When you go
Nice.
out of your head, it's kind of things are more enhanced. And to me, that's what the now is. It's not that suddenly you go into your problems that you currently have. It's the opposite. Your problems are kind of created by your personal thoughts, and it is kind of when you listen and your thoughts stop, it's hard to explain, but that now is beautiful. That's all I can say.
Yeah, and I think that anything can be happening outside you. I mean, I tell the story a lot of the chief Sitting Bull. It was in the West. So anyway, he was in a battle, and all of the bullets were, coming across the field. And this is kind of the American government versus the Native Americans back in those days. And Sitting Bull just walked across the battlefield in the with bullets all going all around him, and he went out into the middle and he just sat. Maybe that's why he's called Sitting Bull. But this wasn't just about like evading all of the bullets that were coming. This was about his frame of mind that was probably not in the mind. He's probably outside of his mind, like you talk about, outside of his head, and creating this space that would seem like magical by his own being. And out of that, he didn't get hit by anything, which it's just such an interesting, maybe it's lore, maybe it's mythical story, but I still love the story because I think that's, whether it's true or not, I think it's a wonderful metaphor for being in that divine space where you're in the now and you're not judging or in the past or the present, and you feel all of the fullness of being. What doesn't matter what's going on around you? Who could really harm you? Is anybody out there who could really harm you? I mean, this is like, I think this is our essence. And this is who we are created to be. And you're experiencing it, and you're helping other people experience it through your story. Because I think that this is so important. This is I want to say it's our line of defense, and that's not even a good word because there's nothing to defend ourselves from. But we get so overwhelmed by the problems of the world. And it sounds like you're able to create this space in your life where the problems of the world have no real significance. Is that true?
Yeah, to some degree, like I spend very little time really. I do watch the news sometimes,
Oh,
but
don't do that.
but it has very little meaning to me because it's not, I mean, it's not where the answers lie, the answers don't lie with the problems. And I was kind of umming and ahhing if I should talk about my story, if I should talk about what I know, because I've kind of had this insight, for a while. And I think the hard thing for me is I see a lot of suffering around me. I'm not talking about global, because obviously there is a lot of suffering way beyond that I see living in, beautiful Wales. But it's just even suffering, with people I work with and seeing people with mental anguish. And, one lady in passing once said to me, I can't stop my mind, and I feel like, well, it's not really appropriate for me to be, maybe, I don't know if I should talk now, or, it was kind of I don't know, like some staff do or something. And and then I hear people talking, and I see people getting ill, and it's really hard to watch. It's really hard to watch, I guess, and to see people suffer. And I mean, not necessarily all the time, but a lot of the time it could be avoided, and it's just a lack of understanding. And they just haven't probably ever been exposed, to any concept of being able to go outside of your head and looking for beautiful feelings inside. Or it's really, I get quite emotional, but it's really hard to watch how lost, so many people are, and it's innocence. I mean, that no one teach. Well, don't say no one. There's loads of books out there and stuff, but it's amazing how most people don't know they exist or have the thought to read them. It's kind of not in their world. It's not on their vibration, or whatever you want to say. So it's so yes, I started feeling this kind of desire that it might not be right to speak about it at work so much, but maybe I can start sharing, and then maybe things will happen, and I can start helping, because I think there's a huge desire. I feel like, because well-being is becoming such a big topic. It's like people know now that feeling good is important, and the money. I feel like people are coming to like this realization it's not all about work and money, and people are taking well-being seriously. But I feel like a lot of people are in the dark, and kind of rummaging around and looking for things and attachments, so they'll start exercising, and then that'll become like an attachment. So if they don't exercise one day, they feel rubbish, or they'll look for things or to attach themselves to, rather than realizing that what they're looking for is inside. I remember Sid once said he said, I think he was in the 70s or something, like everyone was like running off to India, and trying to have these like amazing experiences and meet the Dalai Lama, I don't know, all these kind of really big people. And he was like, the cheaper option is just look in the mirror.
You don't have to go that far. So it sounds to me like you have a desire to help people. Like you have a desire to help, or to at least expose them to something that could help them. I think this is hard. This is hard for me too. Okay, so I think it takes a lot of discernment about, does a person want to change their life or not? Because not everybody does, but some do. And how do you discern? I think it takes, you really got to reach inside to that gift of discernment that we all have, and discern whether this person wants to hear your story or not. And I think this is going to be a path that you may be on for a while. I think this podcast may be out there and help wake some people up. But when you see people suffering, or with their nose to the grind, they're looking down, or just suffering in life in general, because so many people are just really asleep. We've all, and I don't mean that as a judgment, I've been asleep. We've all been conditioned to live a certain way. We've not been conditioned to go inside, like you say. And the key is inside. So it sounds to me like you want to be a person who can help point people to their inside.
Yeah, I'll say that spot on. And like you said, it's also doing it in an appropriate way. So when
Uh-huh.
I saw your podcast was called like the Spiritual Forum, it was like, okay, so your listeners are likely to be people just open, and kind of on a journey themselves, and I think you're totally right. It's not appropriate, to not everyone's ready to go on a journey, or and why should I even judge if they should go on the journey? Like
Exactly.
it's not like I understand life. I don't. There's loads of questions, I have about life. There's loads I don't understand. So it's not for me to say, oh yeah, you should be, you need to be enlightened, or you need to,
Right. You need
go
to do what I do.
inside. It's nice to give people their space, and I feel like it's just nice to come to places like here, on a podcast where people are on the journey and people are looking and interested, and then if I can help anyone in some way, to have that beautiful feeling and to get in touch with all that spirituality inside, then it's beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah, I have just one thought about this, and that is I think that the art of asking questions in approaching a person is probably the lightest touch possible. And I just think if you so I know you have a Jewish background. I would have a Christian background, but again, we can take these stories as metaphorical or literal. But um, in the Christian Gospels, Jesus would never go in and just heal somebody. He would say, "Do you want to be healed?" And he would ask that question. And I think it's a really interesting approach that may work for you sometime when you see somebody that is in despair. Do you want to feel better? This is just an idea as opposed to, hey, you need to go on this inner journey, or ignoring them altogether, because somebody may actually say yes and be able to use your help.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's a new journey for me.
Yeah.
I'm in a new place in life. I get, like I have a normal job, as it were. I never had normal jobs. I was always teaching, and I had a weird existence in my early 20s. I mean, if I needed a bookshelf, to be built, it was like one phone call and someone would be there and it'd be built for me, because I was like the rabbi. I was like, the kind of spiritual figure, and I was in my early 20s, and now I live like a more normal life, and I build things myself, and it's just kind of navigating the new life where I can still share, and I don't know where I'm going to go, with it. And like you said, just like exploring different approaches, I like what you're saying. Yeah.
I have a question for you. When you told your story, and when you were doing in that 4.5 years, and you were really, 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 really devoted to the study, and then you said that you burst into tears, and it seemed like you had this kind of moment of surrender. And I'm wondering if then the next day the guy shows up in the cafeteria. I'm wondering if the answer to that prayer hasn't been your whole life, not just that guy showing up the next day. Do you know
Oh,
what I'm
you mean
saying?
that started something? Or?
It started something and it kept going and it kept going and it kept going. It wasn't just like that guy was the answer to your prayer, but you kind of surrendered to the divine. It sounded like to me, like you want to know what is real, and and then you've been getting answers ever since that moment.
Yeah, is I like the word surrender. I think that's what it was. It was like, I don't
Yeah.
know, I surrender. And I've never thought about it like that, but I was that beginning of a whole chain of things that followed. I think that's fascinating.
It
I think.
really is. I mean, that's how it sounds to me, because it sounded like that was a really, I think some of us have these on our knees kind of experiences, and I mean that metaphorically. You don't have to be on your knees, but I do think there is this kind of palms open, like I'm lost. I can't find it on my own, and I surrender. And I'm paraphrasing. I'm not saying you said those words, but it's kind of that kind of moment. And I think when we do that, the universe, God, divine, source, whatever all those words you want to use, it's there to create a path. Now that path may take us into dark, dark places, you know, 23rd Psalm, even though you walk through the valley of the shadow, but I'm with you. And, again, whether you believe that literally or figuratively, it's a beautiful poem, and that the divine has been walking with you all of this time. And whatever your next thing is, because it sounds like you're ready to express yourself more and share this amazing experience, this amazing life you've had. And I just think about breaking away from a family tradition that's so deeply rooted would be so hard. Maybe it wasn't for you, but it'd be so hard. And it takes so much strength and energy. And this path that you forged for yourself, it just feels like it's divinely guided. And I just really think that the next step for you is also divinely guided. And, you may or may not want to be, a person who's guiding people to their center, but I feels like that's what's up for you next, and that you're going to be guided in how to do that starting here.
I yeah, I think that experience that happened, when I surrendered, and that kind of it. I think that's what made it really hard being an atheist, during that
Right.
period, because
Yeah.
it kept coming into my head, and it was hard to find kind of at the time, I wanted like logical, want everything to kind of be logical, and that experience kept coming up. It's like, oh, but that just doesn't quite fit. Kind of how do I deal with that? So there is something about that experience, because it was so in my face, that it did kind of guide me. I do want to say as well, because I think this might be important for some listeners. So I don't know if any of your listeners have left religion, and it's not just Judaism. There are other forms, even I think there are other strict forms of Christianity and Islam, different
Yes.
religions where it's very hard to leave, if you do choose to leave. I actually have a really nice relationship with my parents now, and my wife has a good relationship with her family, and we did work on it, and it's not perfect, and sometimes I still don't know quite what's going on in their head. Like, do they think I'm going to hell? Or, you kind of think, I don't know. But we've kind of come to a mutual understanding, and my parents, get on well with my kids, and they'll chat, and they've also taken an interest in certain things, that my kids do that aren't necessarily the religious things to do, just stuff. But I say that because I think that's important for some people to hear, because I know that relationship, you don't want to lose that relationship with your parents if you can help it. And that's not always in our control, but my wife and I, we really did want to work on it. We felt like it was important, to try and hold on to it. And there were certain times where we just couldn't, because we had so much real processing. We just needed space. But eventually we were able to engage. And I think it's nice, if you can, to try and come to that kind of a place of understanding,
Staying connected with your birth family is very important. I know there's times where you actually do have to cut ties for maybe abuse or whatever, but I think short of that, staying connected is so valuable to your psyche and your soul. So that's so interesting that you were able to make such a dramatic shift away from your family tradition and stay connected.
Yeah, I had one experience, because I was seeing a therapist at the time, and it really it was funny. He turned out to be Jewish, but I had no idea he was Jewish when so that was kind of fascinating. And he was never religious, but it was just kind of interesting. And I stayed with him for a little bit. He was very expensive, but I just kind of had a few sessions with him. And he encouraged me to go and kind of have it out with my kids, with my parents. I think he called it, like, just open conversation. And I did it. This was a while back, but I basically, I went to the house. I asked to see them, and I literally just spilled out, like, just stuff from my childhood that was bothering me. Like just, it's just, I still can't work out if it was a good idea or not. I'll be honest. I think it was good. I mean, it's worked out well in the end, but I don't know if it's something, I just don't know if it's something I'd recommend. But it was just, I just got it all off my chest. I mean, it was just this kind of whoosh, like it all just, everything I was angry about, was just like kind of everything just came out, because I had a lot of anxiety as a kid, just loads of things, and just things that I was upset about the way my parents treated me. And, I wasn't abused or anything, just things that really bothered me. And I felt like it made my life so difficult, growing up. And they listened, but that was really awkward. But I felt amazing after it. And when I went back to the therapist, he was like, wow, he was like, I've mentioned that to people before, but no one's done it that quickly, like, I like done it within 3 days or something, and he was like, oh, wow. And I think that's just my intensity. Like, I don't know, but when he said it, I was like, okay, I'll do it. It kind of felt like the right thing to do. But it was definitely good for me, because I really had it out with my father, and I really needed to do that. Like, I mean, I think in my journey, it was good. And then it was quite tense after that. Like, it didn't seem good, but I think ultimately it was good. We at least were able to kind of come together. Yeah, it's just kind of interesting, that episode.
I mean, the truth can hurt. The truth can hurt, but once it's out there, then you have the opportunity to actually be in relationship. I think it's the withholding of the truth that creates stagnancy and awkwardness in relationships. But I mean, as a parent, that would be torturous to have my grown-up child come in here and tell me everything. But I can also see that the slate would be clean then. It's like, okay, you've spoken your piece, maybe I'm going to speak a little of my piece. And then you're two authentic people, or three authentic people in your situation, that now you've like laid yourselves bare, and now you can be related.
Yeah. And I think for me, what was fascinating, just thinking about it now, was I thought my father would get really angry. Like, that was my thinking. And that's why I was always scared to kind of have any deep, open, kind of meaningful conversation with him about things bothering me. And he didn't get angry. And that for me was like, whoa.
Yeah.
No, I didn't expect that. And that was a game changer for me. It's interesting. So that, like you said, like laying it all out there, and it for me, like, it ended up being quite positive, because I kind of had this fear that was just made up in my head.
Right. It's your mind. Yeah. Your mind plays out all the scenarios, what could happen and who they're going to be and what I'm going to say and what they're going to say. Yeah. Well, Alan, this has been such a great time. I want to close, but I want to give you the opportunity to say anything else you want to say, anything else you want to say to the world out there, or anything else you've learned, or anything that I haven't covered with you.
Well, firstly, just thank you so much, because this has been like a journey for me. Like, this is the first time that I've ever spoken about this in public, and I've hardly spoken to anyone, even people I know. So it's been a beautiful journey. So thank you for allowing me to go on this journey. I guess all I would say is I would love people to be open to. I don't know if they have to try the listening. I just feel like that's just something I do. But it's just, firstly, if they don't know yet, just know that everything they want is inside. Like, if they really want a new car, what they really want is a feeling of having a new car. Like, just to be open, because and the feeling you can have, inside, and when there's no attachments to it, when you just open. It's just magical, and I think it's so freeing. When it's not that you shouldn't buy the car, it's just to know that you don't need the car and you can still feel amazing. I just feel like just to be open to that truth, that there is a truth to that. And people who might be in dark places, or struggling, is just to know that they are health, they are pure spirituality, and it's always there. And however lost they might feel, like they're not far from the truth. Like, it can't go anywhere. Their health, everything they're looking for is inside. And if their mind could just go quiet just for a split second, that they'll feel that.
That's so beautiful. I love your story, and I would love to see how the rest of your life goes. I don't know how old you are. How old are you now?
I'm 39, so just
See, you're
approaching the
very
40.
young. You're very young to have this realization and this awareness and to have gone through all this questioning and to, find the gold within you. You're very young. So it's like, I just feel like the wind is at your back. The divine is really going to open up a path for you because at 39, you're already this aware. And I'd love to see how your life goes. So it's been really a pleasure to listen to your story, and I really appreciate your coming on and talking with me about it.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, and hopefully we can, keep each other updated and
We
stay.
will. Yeah. It's just so exciting. So thank you, everybody. And thank you, listeners, for listening to Ellen's wonderful story. And I know there are people out there who've been touched by this and you've given them the opportunity to question their life or relook at something or decide maybe they don't need that new car. And the whole the gift of listening, that's my big takeaway. I've got a lot of takeaways from this one, but the gift of listening is something that is so available to every single one of us that we can do this like right now and that could change our lives. So thank you for the gift of teaching us about that.
It was my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Okay. So thanks again, everyone, for listening. And I now close the spiritual forum.